Have you ever sat in a crowded room and known exactly what someone was feeling before they even processed it themselves? You were not watching their eyes or listening to their words, yet somehow your body picked up the quiet clenching of their jaw, the slight alteration in their breathing, or the sudden coolness that entered the space. While everyone else was simply moving through the room, you were feeling the entire weight of it. For decades, mainstream pop culture has tried to tell us what this sensitivity means. They label people who feel deeply as delicate, fragile creatures, emotional sponges who bleed tears because the world is too loud, too mean, or too overwhelming. They make you believe that your depth is a flaw, an emotional defect, or a burden you are condemned to carry for the rest of your life. That narrative is not only wrong, it is profoundly misleading. Welcome to Slow Down with Brenda. If you've been feeling exhausted lately, or if you've spent years wondering why you seem to carry the weight of everyone else's emotional weather, I am so glad you are here. Take a slow, deep breath with me, sit back, and let's look at what is really happening inside you. What mainstream psychology mislabels as hypersensitivity is not a sign of weakness. It is actually an extraordinary hyper-calibrated neural network operating at maximum capacity. You do not float helplessly like an unmoored sponge in an ocean of other people's feelings. You operate like a fine-tuned sensory system, continuously reading microdata from your environment. Think back to your past. For some of you, this level of perception has simply always been there, part of your temperament since childhood, the same way some people are natural early risers or musically gifted. For others, it was shaped more by circumstance. When you grow up or live in an environment where safety requires predicting the mood of an unpredictable parent, partner, or authority figure, your brain adapts. It creates dedicated, high-speed neural pathways to read subtle micro-expressions, slight shifts in vocal tone, and sudden deviations in body posture. You became a master at reading the room because, once upon a time, reading the room was your primary way to keep yourself safe. The tragedy is not that you have this ability. The tragedy is that nobody handed you the operating manual for it. You were given the hardware of an advanced radar system, but forced to navigate life without a protective boundary. So every time an emotional storm enters your space, your system opens the door and lets it sit right in your living room. Maybe you've had one of those evenings where you finally sat down on the couch after a long day, completely drained, and realized you weren't physically tired. You were simply carrying emotional clutter that didn't even belong to you. You feel forced to retreat into solitude just to wash your mind clean. If that sounds like your daily existence, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not broken. You do not need to be fixed, and you certainly do not need to become cold or hardened to survive. And I want to gently say this too. If your sensitivity feels less like a quiet gift and more like a constant, exhausting state of alert, if you find yourself bracing for danger even in safe rooms, that's worth talking through with a therapist. Recognizing that possibility isn't a contradiction of anything we're exploring today. It's simply another form of taking your inner world seriously. Real sovereignty over your emotional life begins the exact moment you stop treating this incoming sensory data as a personal crisis and start recognizing it as simple, objective information. When someone enters a room carrying tension, anger, or deceit, your nervous system flags it immediately. It isn't a signal for you to panic, fix them, or absorb their pain. It is simply your internal system saying, "Here is what is present in this space right now." You don't need to fight your sensitivity, and you don't need to put up aggressive walls to protect yourself. You simply need to learn how to step back, neutralize your internal state, and observe the room without letting its chaos catch fire inside your heart. Your depth is not your weakness, it is your quiet strength, and together, we are going to learn how to carry it a little more lightly. Once you begin to see your sensitivity as objective information rather than an emotional crisis, the next natural question is, how do we stop taking on the heavy energy around us? When a sensitive person steps into a room filled with tension, anxiety, or unspoken grief, the body's instinctive reaction is to match that frequency. If the person standing in front of you is breathing fast and holding anger, your own heart speeds up. You absorb the atmospheric pressure until you can no longer tell where their feelings end and yours begin. To step out of this exhausting cycle, we must learn the first quiet protocol of inner sovereignty: absolute calibration before engagement. Imagine walking into a chaotic environment, and instead of letting your nervous system expand to catch every emotion in the air, you gently drop your own internal signature down to absolute zero. You become like a sensory dark room. You ground your feet, take a slow breath, and establish a quiet, neutral baseline before you say a single word. Before you react, offer advice, or absorb the room's energy, you allow yourself a quiet moment to ask 3 simple, observant questions. What is the real baseline energy of this space? Is someone actively trying to project their panic or control onto others? Where is the gap between what people are saying and what their body language is revealing? By maintaining this calm, observant baseline, you gently transform from a sponge into a thoughtful analyst. You are no longer absorbing the room, you are simply decoding it. This brings us to the second principle of protecting your peace: the quiet, tactical mirror. In life, we occasionally cross paths with individuals who feed on emotional drama, covert control, or calculated provocation. They cast out sharp remarks, passive-aggressive bait, or exaggerated urgency, hoping to hook a reaction out of you. They know that sensitive souls naturally want to explain, reassure, or smooth things over. When you respond to emotional bait by defending yourself, writing long explanations, or matching their emotional heat, you hand them the exact power they were seeking. You give them your focus, your energy, and a map of your softest triggers. Instead, the lone wolf empath deploys a different response: complete emotional stillness. When someone brings intense, chaotic energy toward you, try meeting it with short, polite, and completely flat responses. You don't get angry, you don't raise your voice, you don't offer defensive counterarguments. You simply listen, offer a calm, neutral acknowledgement, and let the space remain quiet. When you meet intense emotional bait with soft, unshakable neutrality, you create an invisible mirror. The manipulator's energy finds nowhere to attach, and like a wave hitting a solid cliff, it bounces straight back onto them. They quickly realize they cannot find your control panel, and inside that quiet space, their own chaotic intent is forced into the light. You don't need to win an argument or prove your point to someone who isn't listening. Your calm, unbothered presence is the strongest boundary you will ever build. Remember this: your peace is not something you have to fight for. It is something you choose not to trade away. When you drop your emotional signature to zero and reflect back what isn't yours, you regain absolute control over your internal weather. Learning to hold your calm baseline is a powerful first step. But what happens when you realize someone in your life consistently brings insincerity, deceit, or emotional drain into your space? In traditional social conditioning, setting a boundary is almost always presented as a loud, dramatic event. We are taught to craft long, detailed text messages, demand heart-to-heart sit-downs, or engage in heated arguments to make the other person understand the full extent of how much they hurt us. We tell ourselves, if I just explain my pain clearly enough, if I find the exact right words, they will finally see what they did, apologize, and change. I want you to pause and ask yourself, how many times has that actually worked? Demanding emotional closure or self-awareness from someone who operates on manipulation, entitlement, or covert hostility is a statistical impossibility. They do not share your values of mutual respect and emotional accountability. When you initiate a high-emotion confrontation to tell someone off, you are not establishing a boundary. You are engaging in a heavy, exhausting exchange of emotional currency. You are handing them a detailed blueprint of your softest vulnerabilities, showing them precisely how deeply they managed to affect you and revealing how much power they still hold over your peace. The lone wolf empath replaces dramatic confrontation with a far quieter, more surgical protocol: silent, symmetric disengagement. This practice rests on a simple, non-negotiable truth. Your time, your attention, and access to your inner world are privileges, not default rights that anyone can claim indefinitely. The moment you process sufficient behavioral data proving that an individual is operating with persistent dishonesty, disrespect, or hidden malice, the trial period is permanently over. Of course, this is not the answer for every relationship. If someone you love is willing to listen, take accountability, and actually change, an honest conversation is still the stronger path forward. Silent disengagement is reserved for people who have repeatedly shown you, through their actions, not just one bad moment, that they don't respect your boundaries. There is no angry confrontation. There is no dramatic warning shot, no emotional ultimatum, and no public scene. There is simply a quiet, mathematical reduction of access. We call this disengagement symmetric because you simply match their level of genuine emotional investment down to zero. If someone becomes distant, superficial, or manipulative, you don't fight to pull them back or force them to be honest. You gently match their distance. You drop all deep personal sharing. Your text responses become polite, brief, and purely informative. Invitations are declined gracefully without elaborate defensive excuses. The perimeter of your intimacy slowly and systematically contracts until that person is quietly phased outside the fence line of your life. Think about how much metabolic energy you save when you stop trying to fix broken connections. You no longer waste midnight hours drafting long paragraphs to someone who will only use your words against you. You no longer lie awake, rehearsing arguments in your head. When someone who sought to manipulate or control you prepares for a battle, a dramatic argument, or a scene they can twist to play the victim, and instead encounters a wall of calm, polite, unbroken air, they find nothing to hold on to. Because there is no anger to fight against and no emotional output to feed on, the toxic dynamic simply starves to death. You do not owe your life's precious energy to anyone who uses it as leverage against you. The highest form of personal discipline, and the ultimate protection for a sensitive soul, is not revenge. It is the total, permanent, and completely indifferent revocation of your presence. You simply close the door, lock it softly, and keep walking forward in peace. When you quietly reclaim your time and step back from draining connections, you naturally create a quiet space around yourself. Yet, in a society obsessed with constant noise, that quietness is often misunderstood. We live in a culture that pushes us to be endlessly available, highly visible, and constantly connected. Spending extended periods alone is often labeled as unhealthy, antisocial, or lonely. Society makes you feel guilty for pulling back, subtly convincing you that if you aren't out there engaging with everyone, something inside you must be broken. That social metric might apply to average sensory profiles, but it does not apply to a deeply perceptive mind. When your nervous system processes far more microdata per minute than the average person, tracking subtle body shifts, unspoken tensions, and ambient emotional noise, you accumulate immense sensory clutter. Carrying all that unprocessed data through your days is like walking through life with a heavy coat soaked in rainwater. For a sensitive soul, solitude is not isolation. Solitude is essential biological calibration. Think of intentional solitude as a gentle, non-negotiable purge cycle for your mind. It is the quiet room where you step away from the world's heavy noise, hang up that soaked coat, and allow your nervous system to rest. It is the sacred space where you clean your perceptual lens and softly ask yourself, which of these feelings actually belong to me, and which ones did I pick up from the room today? And if you notice that no amount of quiet time seems to bring real relief, if the exhaustion runs deeper than a day's noise, that's worth paying attention to as well. Reaching out to a therapist isn't a sign that you failed at managing your sensitivity. It's simply another form of the same self-respect we're talking about today. When you reclaim quiet time as essential self-preservation rather than a guilty habit, you stop burning out. You give yourself permission to recover your natural, unhurried rhythm. Along with intentional solitude, there is profound freedom in mastering the art of moving through public spaces unremarkably. Our egos often want to be seen, validated, and acknowledged as the smartest or most intuitive person in the room. An amateur empath often wants everyone to know how deeply they feel, how much they notice, and how sharp their instincts are. The lone wolf empath understands a deeper truth. Excessive visibility is vulnerability. When you walk into public spaces completely unguarded, broadcasting your deepest values, rawest vulnerabilities, and sharpest insights to anyone who happens to look, you place an unnecessary target on your back. Opportunists and manipulators actively scan for unshielded openness, viewing unfiltered vulnerability not as a virtue, but as an easy invitation to probe and exploit. Mastering the art of being unremarkable means wearing a psychological cloaking device. It is a consciously engineered, polite, pleasant, yet entirely neutral exterior. You dress comfortably, speak softly, and keep your deepest insights, personal dreams, and long-term plans close to your heart. You allow others to assume you are simple, quiet, or completely ordinary. Wearing this gentle shield is not being fake or deceptive. It is practical wisdom. It is creating a safe, calm boundary that keeps your internal garden protected while your eyes and heart remain fully clear. When people underestimate you, they drop their aggressive defenses and show you their unedited baselines. They hand you their true psychological profile without you ever having to demand it. You don't need to prove your depth to a world that isn't asking to understand you. Keep your energy safe, let your outer presence remain simple and calm, and save your deep, precious depth for the few who have earned the right to see it. When you learn to protect your solitude and walk through the world with a gentle, protective shield, you naturally begin to filter out the unnecessary noise of life. But as you move forward, one fundamental question remains. How do you discern who is truly safe to let into your inner circle? As sensitive souls, we naturally want to believe in the goodness of others. We want to open our hearts, share our joys, and trust that those around us hold genuine goodwill. Yet, most of us have experienced the sharp, silent sting of sharing a moment of true happiness or vulnerability, only to feel a cold wave of subtle judgment, envy, or detachment instantly fill the room. To protect your peace without closing your heart to genuine connection, you don't need complicated psychological theories. You simply need to pay attention to a single, small behavioral cue. The next time you share a moment of true relief, a quiet victory, or a vulnerable truth with someone in your life, try not to focus only on their mouth. People easily train their lips to smile and their voices to offer polite congratulations. Instead, notice their eyes during the moment right after you finish speaking. A true ally, someone who genuinely celebrates your existence and respects your peace, will often show a small, instinctive relaxation around their eyes. Their gaze will tend to hold warm, steady contact. In that fraction of a second, you may feel a quiet softness in their presence. There is no competition, no rush, and no subtle tension. On the other hand, someone carrying passive hostility or discomfort with your success may show a brief flicker of tension, a quick blink, a flash of the eyes widening, or a gaze that drops away. This isn't a lie detector, and it isn't a courtroom. People's eyes can also tighten because they're tired, distracted, self-conscious, or simply having an off day, not because they wish you harm. Treat this cue as one small data point that invites you to pay closer attention over time, not as final proof about someone's character from a single glance. We do not observe these micro-signals to judge others, feel superior, or build high walls of bitterness around our lives. We observe them so we can allocate our vital energy with quiet wisdom. You do not owe your raw, beautiful vulnerability to every person who crosses your path. You reserve your deepest thoughts and softest feelings for the people who, over time, show you again and again that your heart is safe with them. Stop viewing your perception as an unbearable burden. Stop allowing a noisy world to tell you that your depth is a flaw or an emotional sickness. Your sensitivity is not a curse that dooms you to a life of exhaustion. When paired with calm boundaries, silent disengagement, and self-respect, it becomes your greatest source of inner sovereignty. Before we close our conversation today, I want to leave you with one small, practical step for tomorrow. The next time you walk into a room or step into a conversation, do not feel rushed to fill the quiet. Do not hurry to make everyone feel comfortable or prove your value. Take one slow, grounding breath. Drop your internal emotional noise down to zero and simply give yourself permission to observe for 3 full seconds before you respond. Notice how much lighter life feels when you stop carrying what was never yours to hold. One last thing before we go. Everything I've shared today comes from lived experience and personal reflection, not clinical training. If what you're feeling runs deep, if the exhaustion or the hypervigilance feels like more than everyday sensitivity, please know that talking to a licensed therapist is a wonderful, worthwhile step. Nothing here replaces that kind of support. Thank you for spending this quiet time with me today. Remember to take care of yourself, slow down, and I will talk to you very soon.